can't honestly believe that I'm from the tribe of Judah and once hid out in ancient Egypt, which is in northern Africa. All 12 tribes look the exact opposite of me, but yet the masses are still dancing around in Wonderland. I and those who help me push strong delusions have an agenda, which includes mixing up the tribes. Matthew the 13th chapter tells you how the wicked one sows tares all over the world, which is his offspring. Watchman and Deborah have pulled together some facts that will hopefully get your attention. Don't deceive yourself with foolish lies.
Where are the 12 tribes of Israel today, and who are they? Though many believe that the so-called Jews represent all 12 tribes of Israel, the fact is they don't represent any of the tribes. They are actually Jewish converts to a religion called Judaism. They are not the descendants of Jacob, the father of the Israelites. So if they are not, how can we identify who they are today? Here are some biblical clues that will help you to identify who the 12 tribes are.
Deuteronomy 28, verse 45 and 46. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee, and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed, because thou hearkenest not unto the voice of Yahuwah thy Elohim, to keep his commandments and his statutes, which he commanded thee. And they shall be upon thee for a sign, and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever.
The scriptures make it clear that the curses of Deuteronomy 28 would be a sign upon the Israelites. Many people, including our people, knew that something was wrong with us. We just couldn't pinpoint it. Caucasians were teaching that it was the curse of Canaan, Ham's son, that was on us. But we know, according to the scriptures, that prophecy was fulfilled when the Canaanites became hewers of wood and drawers of water for the Israelites. So when we read the curses of Deuteronomy 28, we know that this does not fit the so-called Jews that's dwelling in the land of Israel today. Also, the scripture states that once the true Israelites are back in their land, that they would not learn war anymore, and that the whole world would be at peace. Instead, we see wars all over the Middle East, all over the world even.
Micah 4, verse 2 and 3. Many nations shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of Yahuwah, and to the house of the Elohim of Jacob, and he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For the law shall go forth of Zion, and the word of Yahuwah from Jerusalem, and he shall judge among many people, and rebuke strong nations afar off. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up a sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Isaiah 14, verse 5 through 7. Yahuwah have broken the staff of the wicked, and the scepter of the rulers. He who smote the people in wrath with a continual stroke, he that ruled the nations in anger, is persecuted, and none hindereth. The whole earth is at rest, and is quiet. They break forth into singing. The 12 tribes of Israel are all Negro. They fled into Africa because they were Negro. There are many that claim that the 12 tribes of Israel were a mixed race people. This claim is based on two factors. One, the handmaidens of Laban, Bilhah and Zilpah, were they Negroid or Caucasoid? The scripture doesn't mention the genealogy of Bilhah and Zilpah, but we know for certain that their offspring only married with Negroes. We know for a fact that they were not Caucasoid, but Negro. 2. Joseph married an Egyptian, which we know for certain that their offspring were Negro as well. Thus, there were no offspring mixed Caucasoid among the children of Israel. The so-called mixed multitude that left out of Egypt still would have been called Negro in appearance, because the children of Israel were not mixing with Caucasoid. Using Joseph and Moses as an example to claim that the marriage to foreigners was permitted, it is important to note that the law had not yet been established. We know that the law explicitly forbids the marrying of foreigners.
Throughout the Bible, we can see very clear indicators of what is prophesied to happen to the Israelites. Although they've had many captivities in the past, in the last days there is a specific prophecy that would affect only the tribe of Judah.
Isaiah 11, verse 12. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth.
In Isaiah, the 11th chapter and the 12th verse, it was said that the outcast of Israel would be assembled together, and the dispersed of Judah would be gathered from the four corners of the earth. Outcast meaning put out of the land of Israel, and dispersed meaning sent into slavery. While Israel was outcast from the land, Judah was the only tribe to go into this final captivity, but will be gathered from the four corners of the earth. From here, we can draw a direct correlation to the transatlantic slave trade and figure out where the tribe of Judah went.
Only one of the 12 tribes was actually shipped into captivity, and that was Judah. And the scripture makes that quite clear. Judah and Israel were separated. And it was Judah that committed abomination against the Most High.
Ezekiel 37, verse 21 and 22. And say unto them, Thus saith Yahuwah Elohim, Behold, I will take the children of Israel from among the heathen, whether they be gone, and will gather them on every side, and bring them into their own land, and I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be king over them all, and they shall be no more two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms any more at all.
And under the leadership of wicked kings, Judah had forsaken the one true Elohim. And the people worshiped idols and practiced the same wickedness as the other nations that surrounded them.
Ezekiel 8, verse 15 through 18. Then said he unto me, Hast thou seen this, O son of man? Turn ye yet again, and thou shalt see greater abominations than these. And he brought me into the inner court of Yahuwah's house. And behold, at the door of the temple of Yahuwah, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men, with their backs toward the temple of Yahuwah, and their faces toward the east. And they worshipped the sun toward the east. Then he said unto me, Hast thou seen this, O son of man? Is it a light thing to the house of Judah that they commit the abominations which they commit here? For they have filled the land with violence, and have returned to provoke me to anger. And lo, They put the branch to their nose. Therefore will I also deal in fury. Mine eyes shall not spare, neither will I have pity. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, yet will I not hear them.
The Most High sent Judah into captivity because of the abominations he committed in worshiping the sun, and scattered them throughout the four corners of the earth. And the scripture makes that quite clear.
Job 3 verse 6. The children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have ye sold unto the Grecians, that ye might remove them far from their border. Zechariah 1 verse 21. Then said I, what come these to do? And he spake, saying, these are the horns which have scattered Judah, so that no man did lift up his head. But these are come to fray them, to cast out the horns of the Gentiles, which lifted up their horn over the land of Judah to scatter it.
Now, throughout the Bible, we can see very clear indicators of what is prophesied to happen to the 12 tribes of Israel. Although they've had many captivities in the past, in the last days there was a specific prophecy that would affect only the tribe of Judah. Outcast meaning put out of the land of Israel, and dispersed meaning sent into slavery. Now, Israel was outcast from the land, but Judah was the only one that was sent into this final captivity, but will be gathered from the four corners of the earth.
The tribe of Judah are the black Negroes that were shipped in the transatlantic slave trade to North, South, and Central America, Haiti, Cuba, Mexico, Jamaica, Portugal, Spain, West Indies, England, and other places around the world. Even though the indigenous people of some of these areas were black, they were conquered by Europeans, and because of the mixing of the seed between European males and black women, what we see today is essentially the creation of a third race.
When we were children, we were told that we have a motherland, and that motherland was Spain. However, we have discovered later in our lives that, as a matter of fact, we have several motherlands. And one of the greatest motherlands of all is no doubt Africa. We love Africa. And every day we are much more aware of the roots we have in Africa. Also, America is our motherland. Africa, America, and Bolivar used to say that we are a new human race in Latin America, that we are not Europeans, nor Africans, or North Americans, that we are a mixture of all those races, and there is no doubt that Africa resounds with a pulse like 1,000 drums.
Many of the descendants of the Negros shipped into slavery to these places are still there and are still black.
North American Negroes, descendants of Negro slaves. South American Negroes, Colombia Negroes, Argentina Negroes, Brazil Negroes, Uruguay Negroes, descendants of Negro slaves. West Indies Negroes, descendants of Negro slaves. Haitian Negroes, descendants of Negro slaves. Cuban Negroes, descendants of Negro slaves. Mexican Negroes, descendants of Negro slaves. Jamaicans are Negroes, descendants of Negro slaves. Spanish Negroes are descendants of Negro slaves.
Portugal Negroes are descendants of Negro slaves. United Kingdom Negroes are descendants of Negro slaves.
Many of the descendants of the Negros shipped into slavery to these places are still there and are still black. However, the images widely shown of Portuguese, Argentinians, Uruguayans, Mexicans, Cubans, Guatemalans, Panamanians, North American Indians, and Puerto Ricans are a mixed race people, and many confuse them with the indigenous by claiming them to be as such and ignoring those of dark skin. The indigenous seed has been whited out and replaced with a lighter skin, mixed seed of a European father and a black mother.
I'm not an Israelite.
See, now that guy definitely ain't no Israelite. He can't even pronounce the word right.
Who were the original inhabitants of South and Central America? Everyone would like to stake their claim, but the fact is that there was a population of people there prior to European invasions. The original inhabitants left many clues of who they were right on the walls of caves, monuments built, and other structures. There were even pyramids and what they call large Olmec heads of what the original inhabitants looked like. The Olmec heads are irrefutable proof that the people of the region had the features of so-called black people. With large lips, wide noses, and other features, it would be hard to deny the evidence of our own eyes as to who these people were. One could only draw a conclusion that the original inhabitants sailed here from the African continent.
There is a lot of confusion concerning who the 12 tribes of Israel are today. And this confusion is based on the so-called 12 tribes chart that's circulating among the Israelite communities. The chart is as follows. Judah, the Negroes, African Americans. Benjamin, the West Indies. Levi, the Haitians. Simeon, the Dominicans. Zebulon, from Guatemala to Panama. Ephraim, the Puerto Ricans. Manasseh, the Cubans. Gad, North American Indians. Reuben, Seminole Indians. Naphtali, Argentina and Chile. Asher is Colombia to Uruguay. And Issachar are the Mexicans.
There are three main reasons, among others, why the so-called 12 tribes chart is invalid. In this segment, we will focus on the three main reasons, as the other points require more detailed information. Point 1. According to the Bible, the tribe of Judah would be the only tribe sent into this final captivity. The Bible also states that the tribe of Judah would be shipped all over the earth, which means northward, southward, eastward, and westward. The chart that is circulating shows all 12 tribes in this final captivity and only shows dispersal to 2 continents, North and South America. That is hardly the 4 corners of the earth. The tribe of Judah only have been sent all over the earth, living among different nations, speaking in many different tongues and languages, according to the lands that they were dispersed to. Those that captured these Israelites would not have separated them according to tribes, because they would not have cared about such things. Not to mention, by the time this final captivity had taken place, Judah was already separated from the rest of the tribes as outlined in scriptures in many places. So the rounding up of Israelites by tribal name would not have taken place or been maintained by the slave gatherers. The scripture does not support this chart in any way, especially since the other tribes were not included in the final captivity. Although Israel was exiled from the land of Israel, only Judah was dispersed to the four corners of the earth. As the Bible has shown, in the last days, the other tribes will be gathered from regions of the earth that are not even included on the so-called 12 tribes chart.
12 tribes chart was created in order to justify Israelite men marrying foreign or non-Israelite women. If these men were really trying to keep the laws of the Most High, then they would know that even marrying outside of your tribe was against the law. So even if the so-called Latinos and South American women were Israelites from another tribe, in which we know they are not, men of Judah are supposed to marry the women of Judah. This chart and the teachings behind it is causing an increase in the sins of Israel. Many Israelite men who promote the 12 tribes chart talk about American black women in a degrading manner as though they are the scum of the earth. Why don't you get yourself a Haitian or Jamaican woman then? They're on the 12 tribes chart just like the Latinos, but I don't see y'all going after them. I think we all know why.
When you really think about it, the passage in Esdras actually fits the description of many of your modern African tribes. You have the Limba tribe, the Bimaliki tribe, and countless others that have more historical proof that the passage refers to them rather than a lot of the groups that are named on the so-called 12 tribes chart.
On the border of Black Africa, as the Nubian drummers played into the night, I was reminded of my work 20 years before with a southern African tribe called the Lemba. As far back as anybody could recall, the Lemba had claimed to be Jewish, effectively a lost tribe of Israel. Their oral tradition said they were led out of the Holy Land by priests at the time of the Babylonian invasion, and that they'd taken a sacred object they called Ngoma Lungundu with them.
You have people taking tidbits of information that have been dropped here and there, such as finding fragments of the Hebrew language in the Americas to claim that Latinos, North American Indians, and Mexicans are Israelites, when clearly they don't even fit the narrative of the people in mass who've been keeping the law of Yahuwah from the time of the Assyrian captivity until now. That describes people that are living in Africa right now. Now the Bible clearly tells you that as a whole, they would be walking and living according to the law, which fits the tribes in Africa. It says from the time of that particular captivity, they would be upholding the law until the end times.
I hadn't seen my old friend Raulinga for many years. He's one of the guardians of Lemba traditions and was keen to remind me of the uniqueness of his people's culture.
We adore and worship Yahweh, the only one. We don't adore ancestral spirits. We don't worship idols of animals, trees, stones, the sun, the stars, or the moon, which Yahweh has made. Culture is the backbone. It's a unifying force. Now, I know culture changes in accordance with time and place, but the root of culture remains the same. You see, now we've lost touch with our people for about 2,600 years now.
The Lemba were convinced that they were a lost tribe of Israel. The problem was that no one believed them. They appeared to be completely African. But I discovered a number of mysterious legends and customs that were very un-African. Men from other tribes were not allowed to marry into the Lemba. They refused to eat pigs and certain other creatures. They practiced the ritual slaughter of animals with a special knife. And they circumcised their male children at an early age.
Now the majority of Mexicans and mixed North American Indians and Latinos don't even claim to be the Israelites. What you do have is a very small few individuals who were recently told this lie by so-called black Hebrew Israelites.
This chart and the teachings behind it is what's increasing the sins of Israel.
This unfounded theory is causing a lot of confusion to those who don't understand how a biblical seed line is established for the Israelites. Now, even though biblically the pedigree is established through the father seed line, you're only an Israelite when both parents are at least of a third generation lineage. The following passage will bring clarity to this fact.
Numbers chapter 1, verse 18. And they assembled all the congregation together on the first day of the second month. And they declared their pedigrees after their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names, from 20 years old and upward by their polls.
Now notice, there was an assembly of the congregation to establish this fact. And we all know that this assembly was Israelites only. And when you look in Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 7 through 8, it clearly tells you that the children that are born of those that are not Israelites cannot enter into the congregation of the Most High until their third generation. Point number 2. Another point of this segment is that the so-called blacks that were already in these lands prior to the invasions of Europeans were not Israelites, but the children of Ham. The Israelites did not come until later during the transatlantic slave trade. The signature of the Hamites were all over the land as evidenced by the culture and the architecture of the region. To assume that the so-called black people of any area are Israelites by default is to disregard other factors that prove otherwise. As in the case of the Moors and the black Native Americans, there is no evidence that these groups were indeed Israelites. The whole idea would completely go against what Scripture has shown. The Israelites have not had any power to stand as the Moors did, nor did they occupy any territories en masse without some type of subjugation as the dark-skinned Native Americans were able to achieve. The fact remains that the so-called Native Americans and other South American cultures identify more with the children of Ham and not the Israelites. Point number 3. The final point in this segment is that the mixed race people of these regions shown on the charts were fathered by European men. Hebrew men were being subjugated and castrated and did not father the children of those regions en masse. The European males fathered the majority of the people of these regions and caused a process of blanqueamento, which is the whitening of a dark population of people by mating with them. When you have so-called black people saying that we're more related to Mexicans or Latinos than we are to Africans, it shows a great imbalance of perception and common sense. Now, we're not saying that some of our people weren't shipped to some of these areas. We do realize that. But people are really trying to rebrand Spanish people as Israelites. You have to understand that many of these people have a Spanish male lineage. They came from men from Spain. They were not fathered by Hebrew men, but Spanish men. You can't deny that the appearance of a person has a lot to do with their lineage. It's a very revealing factor in a person's lineage, as a matter of fact. So when you really look at these people, and at their own admission, many of them actually come from Spanish males and not Hebrew males, or so-called black men.
You are not the Father.
This point further disproves the infamous 12 tribes chart and the fact that the images of the people being circulated are not Negro, but a mixed offspring of European males and black females. The slaves that were sent to these regions were indeed Negroes from Africa upon arrival. After the raping of black female populations, the offspring was that of European men. As the children of these European men would grow and mate, they would mate among themselves or back into a European bloodline, which further lightened the gene pool. You can't just toss aside the historical proof that these people have more of a Spanish origin, as the majority of them choose to breed amongst themselves or back into European lineage.
Many of them did not mate with the Hebrew male slaves.
So again, the majority of the groups named on the so-called 12 tribes chart come from the lineage of European men, not Hebrew men. It is important to note that the so-called black people that were already in the land prior to the transatlantic slave trade were not Israelites, but the children of Ham. So you have two things going on. You have the so-called black Native Americans that were already here prior to European invasion. Now, they were raped and subjugated by European men, which created a mixed population of so-called Native Americans.
What did Columbus do when he first made landfall? Quote, rape, murder, and enslavement. Again, the record is solid. Like, the record shows that there are letters written from his best friend, the person closest to Columbus, where he's describing how it was just on a normal, he just rapes women on a normal day. Like, they'll show up, he'll force them to be naked. At first, sometimes they struggle, and then he whips them, and they don't struggle, and then he rapes them. And then there was one line about how by the time I was through with her, it's like she was taught by a group of whores. Oh, okay. His lead priest who was with him, same thing. They would casually have conversations about how they enslaved the people and how they murdered people on a regular basis. I love the irony of these people viewing themselves as Christians.
Situation: Old Mexico is ripe for conquest. Mission: seize land, resources, and native peoples. Execution: lead 500 well-trained Spanish conquistadors. Administration: in the name of the King of Spain. Command and control: Captain General Hernan Cortez.
Nearly 500 years ago, Spanish conquistadors began their conquest of the Americas. The most successful of them all was Hernan Cortez. When Cortez and his men first landed in Mexico in 1519, they carried weapons like this, finely tempered Spanish swords. The people he faced, the Aztecs under Montezuma, were still using relatively primitive weapons like this obsidian blade. Now, obsidian is sharp, but it's very fragile. No match for Spanish steel.
April 1519. The Spanish mission to conquer Mexico is in big trouble. Its leader, Conquistador Hernan Cortez, is facing mutiny from his own troops. They want to end the expedition at Veracruz and return to Cuba, but there's no turning back for Cortez. And he'll make it impossible for any retreat by committing one of the most daring acts in the history of conquest. He burns his own ships. Now, the only option for his soldiers is victory or death. And victory depends on the leadership, diplomacy, audacity, and cunning of one man, Conquistador Hernan Cortez. Cortez knew that he must leave his homeland to seek the fame and fortune he desired. He took his chance alongside other Spaniards sailing to the New World. In 1504, 19-year-old Hernan Cortez landed at Hispaniola, a Spanish colony now known as the Dominican Republic. At age 25, Cortez became a friend of a well-known conquistador named Diego Velázquez de Cuellar. Cortez joined Velázquez in his conquest of Cuba. By 1511, Cuba was conquered, and Velázquez became its first governor. Those who came with him, including Cortez, were rewarded with land on the island. Soon, Velázquez made Cortez magistrate of Santiago.
He was not a very wealthy man, but one of the most important people on the island of Cuba.
On behalf of the King of Spain, Velázquez sent expeditions from Cuba to Mexico. Cortez's ambitions were fueled by stories of the great Aztec Empire. He felt certain this empire held all the riches of the New World. He'd seize this land and become as rich as a king. He'd be known and respected by Spanish society.
Hernan Cortez, the famous Spanish conquistador, arrived in Veracruz in 1519. Then he headed to Mexico City, which the Aztecs called Tenochtitlan. One of his fellow conquistadors was a free black man named Juan Garrido. I'm following in his footsteps. Cortez was dazzled by the city's overall beauty, by its irrigation system, but especially by its gold. He brutally conquered it. Today, Mexico City is constructed on top of ancient Tenochtitlan. With over 21 million residents, it's the largest city in the Western Hemisphere. I've come here to find treasures too. But these are housed in the National Museum of Mexico.
So what are you taking me to see?
We are going to see the Casta paintings.
The Casta paintings.
By the end of the 17th century, interracial relationships were on the rise. The Catholic Church allowed marriage between all groups. The law granted freedom to the children of black slaves and indigenous women. White men increasingly impregnated black women. White men increasingly impregnated black women. White men increasingly impregnated black women.
Now, the offspring of these European men cannot be branded as Israelites, which is what many are trying to do.
We've got to remember that much of the mixed offspring of white slave masters and black women bred among each other and established a whole new third race. In many of these areas, such as Brazil, Mexico, and other areas of South America, the offspring of white males was an intentional act to breed out the black. The majority of them did not breed back into black populations in certain areas, especially South America. Those that did breed back into black populations were due to the slave system of a particular area, such as here in America. The following illustration will hopefully bring clarity to those who wonder how so-called black descendants of slaves can claim to be Israelites with the presence of white slave masters' blood.
Notice, if you will, the half-caste child. And there are ever-increasing numbers of them. Now, what is to happen to them? Are we to allow the creation of an unwanted third race? Should the coloreds be encouraged to go back to the black? Or should they be advanced to white status and be absorbed in the white population? Now, time and again, I am asked by some white man, if I marry this colored person, will our children be black? And as Chief Protector of Aborigines, it is my responsibility to accept or reject those marriages. Here is the answer. 3 generations half-blood grandmother, quadroon daughter, octoroon grandson. Now, as you can see, in the third generation, or third cross, no trace of native origin is apparent. The continuing infiltration of white blood finally stamps out the black color. The Aboriginal has simply been bred out. Bred out. Bred out.
What we have here is 3 generations. Half white man, quadroon woman, and black boy. Now, as you can see, by the 3rd generation or 3rd cross, no trace of white origin or genes is apparent. The continuing infiltration of black blood finally stamps out the white color. The white slave master's color has been simply blacked out.
On the 12 tribes chart, it says that the West Indies is Benjamin. Do you know what the West Indies is? The West Indies is the islands of Cuba, Jamaica, Hispaniola, which is Haiti and Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico. Wait a minute. The chart says that the West Indies is Benjamin. So let me get this straight. Based on what they're saying, that means that the Jamaicans, the Haitians, the Dominicans, the Puerto Ricans, and the Cubans are also Benjamin? Can you see the confusion that's coming from this chart? Also, the chart says that Gad is the Native American Indians, but the Seminole Indians are Reuben, which are also a part of the Native American Indians. It has been shown that the Native Americans, the Hispanics, and the Mexicans all have the Neanderthal gene, and blacks don't. Also, Zebulon is supposed to be from Guatemala to Panama, but according to the 12 tribes chart, Colombia is supposed to be